Raw materials, natural resources, and markets were a motivation for colonization to European nations. For these European nations, Africa had wealth and power written all over it. Before colonization, the African regions were divided in small tribes, kingdoms, and empires. The fact that these small societies lacked national identity facilitated colonization from European nations. Political status was another motivation for European nations to colonize Africa. In the 19th century, power was measured in the number of colonies a nation had. So when European nations saw that Africa was still uncolonized, they fought for it. The white man's burden is what the European colonizers used as an excuse for the unfair treatment they gave to the Africans. They said it was their God-given mission to bring civilization to the African savages. Racism was used to justify colonialism. In a colonial sense, Africans had to move from their primitive existence to a modern European existence. Africans were seen as primitive and backward in development due to the racist ideas of social Darwinism. Social Darwinism is the theory that people, groups, and races are subject to the same laws of natural selection. This meant that the weak were diminished and the cultures were delimited, while the strong grew in power and in cultural influence over the weak.
North Africa. In 1854, a French entrepreneur, Ferdinand de Lesseps, signed a contract to begin building the Suez Canal, which was completed in 1869. This canal made trade easy, mostly to the Britain and its colonies in India and Africa. After the Suez Canal, the British took interest in Egypt because they thought of the Suez Canal as the lifeline to India. So Britain tried to gain as much control as possible over the canal area. And in 1875, they bought Egypt's share in the canal. Egyptians rebelled against the foreign influence in 1881. The British suppressed the revolt and Egypt became a British protectorate in 1914. The British also thought that they should control Sudan in order to protect their interests in Egypt and the Suez Canal. So, in 1881, Muhammad Ahmad, a Muslim cleric known as the Mahdi, launched a revolt. This revolt was against the Egyptian government in Sudan, which had help from the British General Gordon. It until 1898 that the British military forces were able to seize Sudan. In 1879, the French settled in Algeria. This settlement had the purpose of achieving a greater political status rather than benefiting from it economically due to the fact that Algeria is mostly uninhabitable desert. In 1881, the French came back to Africa, but this time to Tunisia. Both of these countries had been former possessions of the Ottoman Empire, yet they had obtained political autonomy. Before the French arrived, Tunisia had begun a process of modern reforms, but financial with difficulties. After their occupation, the French government assumed Tunisia's international obligations. Finally, in 1912, the French established a protectorate over Morocco to avoid war and conflict.
East Africa. In 1885, the Britain and Germany had become the chief rivals in East Africa. As a result, the Berlin Conference recognized both British and German territory in Africa, and Portugal just received Mozambique. Something that happened in this region that was different from the rest was that for the first time, an African nation had defeated a European colonizer. This happened in 1896. The Ethiopians defeated the Italians in battle and avoided colonization. This happened because Ethiopians had a strong national identity and they were to adapt to European technology, weapon, and military strategy.
The Berlin Conference was a meeting that was promoted by the imperialistic powers. So basically we had Belgium, Germany, United Kingdom, France, Spain, and all these different countries that they foresaw that if they didn't organize themselves, they could risk the fate of going to war. So they gathered in Berlin and they arranged how they're going to split Africa. And in a way, it was a way for them to arrange this country in a more peaceful way. However, the sad thing is that none of the African parties were involved in this division of their continent. So it's kind of sad and it's kind of arrogant from the Europeans for them to do something like this.
West Africa. Since West Africa was rich in raw materials, European nations found interest in this region. The raw materials such as paints, timber, hides, and palm oil. Due to the economical importance of this region, the British, French, and German rushed to establish colonies. The local kingdoms and tribes were horribly affected by these colonizers. They couldn't defend themselves because of the lack of unity and the technological superiority of the European nations. In 1874, Great Britain annexed the West Coastal States as the first colony. This was known as the Gold Coast. Britain also established a protectorate in Nigeria. By 1900, the French owned the largest portion of West Africa, after they added the French West Africa. The Germans controlled Togo, Cameroon, German Southwest Africa, and German East Africa. South Africa.
Cuando hablamos sobre las guerras de Boer en Sudáfrica, podemos ver cómo la visión europea sobre lo que antes era Sudáfrica es muy deplorable, porque básicamente para los europeos, en especial a Gran Bretaña, Sudáfrica era un pedazo de tierra, un terreno al que nadie le importaba, pero todos querían un pedazo de él. Básicamente no le daban la importancia que se debía y a sus habitantes los veían como mera materia prima que se podía desechar, por lo que a veces los procedimientos con los que trataban con esa población eran brutales, similares a los de dictadores como Hitler y Stalin.
In the 1830s, the Boers formed two independent republics, the Orange Free State and the Transvaal, later called the South African Republic. The Boers believed that white superiority was ordained by God. They denied non-Europeans any place in their society. The Boers were frequently at battle with the Zulu, an indigenous tribe of South Africa. In the 1880s, British policy came about in South Africa thanks to Cecil Rhodes. His goal was to create a series of British colonies from Cape to Cairo, which would be able to link by a railroad. British settlers rushed into the Transvaal after gold and diamonds were discovered. Rhodes secretly begged a right that was meant to provoke an uprising among British settlers and the Transvaal government. The right failed, but caused a war between the British and the Boers. In 1899, the Boers War began. Guerrilla resistance by the Boers angered the British. The British responded by burning crops and forcing about 120,000 Boers, women and children into detention camps. Finally, in 1902, the British Army won, and a peace treaty was signed. In 1910, the British created an independent Union of South Africa, which combined the Cape Colony and the Boers Republic. This new self-governing nation will be within the British Empire.
West Africa. David Livingstone was a 27-year-old medical missionary and explorer, traveled to uncharted regions in 1841. During his travels, he made very detailed notes about his discovery and sent the information to London. His major goal was to find the river that would open the Central Africa to Europe, commerce, and Christianity. Since Livingstone disappeared for a while, the New York hired Henry Stanley, a young journalist, to find Livingstone. Stanley found him on the eastern shore of Lake Tanganyika. After Livingstone's death in 1873, Henry Stanley decided to carry on Livingstone's work. To unlike Livingstone, Stanley disliked Africa. He explored the Congo River and sailed down to the Atlantic Ocean. Stanley tried to encourage the British to send settlers to the Congo River, but they refused, so he turned to the King of Belgium, Leopold II. King Leopold II rushed into Central Africa in pursuit of an empire. In 1877, the king hired Stanley to set up Belgian settlements in the Congo River. Belgium, as well as the rest of the European nations, colonized Africa using brutal methods with the indigenous people, which attributed to their racist methods because they didn't believe that black men were equal to white men. They thought they didn't even have souls.